Hello and welcome to the stream. Thanks for joining us in chat, and thank you to those of you who will be watching the replay of this in the future. I'm Deej from Bungie, and this is a raid-along. We are gathered here today to play the Scourge of the Past and to hear from some of the people who created that activity, some of the inside, behind-the-scenes, developer insights. So let's get right to it. I'd like to introduce you to only some of the brave developers who worked on this mission, beginning with...
Thank you, Deej. Hi, I'm Brian. I'm the design lead for the raid team. My day-to-day responsibilities include directing and supporting the other designers on the team, and then also all the other disciplines that we rely on and collaborate with to build a raid. I'm also, in my spare time, building raid encounters.
Hi, I'm Andrew Hops. I'm the art lead on the raid team. I work with our world artists and our other art disciplines to create a player journey.
Hi, I'm Catherine Walker. I am the raid team producer, and so I work with all these fine people and many others to collaborate together to create a fine experience.
大家好，我是 Andy Xiao， 我是 Bungie 的特技效果美工，我是负责制作 Destiny 的特技效果。And now for English audiences, hi, my name is Andy Xiao. I'm a VFX artist here at Bungie. I collaborate with designers and artists to create spectacular moments in Destiny.
Spectacular. Visual effects is one of the specialty disciplines that we're going to be taking a deep dive into from one encounter to the next. So the fourth chair will be turned over to other developers throughout the course of this playthrough. We're also going to be hearing from audio, narrative, and combatant design. So stay tuned for that. We're going to meet a lot of people at Bungie, including the brave fire team that we have assembled for the playthrough today. Let's meet the Guardians who are gathering together in orbit. Let's go down the line and beginning with Chase, let's introduce to our audience to the people in your row.
Hi, I'm Chase from the IT engineering team. This is Daniel from the tools engineering team. And we have Aaron, an animator on the cinematics team.
Hi, I'm Nigel from the BizD team. This is Charles from the raid team and Brock from the QA team.
These are some of the most skilled raiders that we have at Bungie. Some of them are raid testers. Some of them are members of what we call Team Velveeta. They're the ones that get out there and help to anti-cheese the raid or protect the raid from being cheesed. And Nigel, you're going to have the honor of driving for the team. You're going to be the player that we're spectating. This is altogether fitting and appropriate because you see a lot of the content that Nigel helps to create in the videos that we release from Bungie, including the Season of the Drifter Bungie Vidoc that we'll be releasing this Thursday morning. So looking really forward to seeing that. Thank you, all of you, for agreeing to play one of the most difficult activities in Destiny in front of a watching live audience. We wish you luck. We now break live to orbit, and you are go for launch. So Brian, as the activity spools up, as the ships descend to the location and the opening cinematic plays, talk to us a little bit about the overarching theme for the Scourge of the Past raid. What were some of the main themes or goals that guided all of the decisions that y'all made in development?
Sure. We started out knowing that we wanted to return to the last city. It was like a Destiny 2 destination that players are familiar with, but maybe hadn't had a lot of experience playing and exploring in. We knew we wanted to revisit the Fallen as a combatant race. And early in the project, the themes of the Black Armory were starting to be understood. We had the families and their rich tradition in weapon crafting and sort of the history that goes along with that. And we worked with the combatant team trying to envision like what would a version of the Fallen that had access to this advanced technology be like. And figuring out the purpose for players to go to the city, to disrupt this sort of syndicate-like faction of the Fallen, recover these lost secrets that the houses had left here and that were actually exposed during the Red War when the Cabal attacked. And all that sort of came together to be this player journey we built.
Here we are in the last safe city. Hops, is there anything that we want to talk to our audience about before we embark on the raid, or should we just get right out there and fight?
Yeah, when we are thinking about where we want to go, one of the things we were looking at when we knew it was in the last city was from the tower in D2, looking out at all these craters, and like kind of what does, as a player, where would I want to go? And so one of the things that really appealed to us was these big bombed out craters out in the city after the Red War. If we want, we can look at our first image. This was from Mass Out, which is our gray box portion of World Art. So you can see we're thinking about how we keep the player in the city, the relationship between the crater and the city. There's early Schnell Tower in there. And yeah.
No.
Why did that even start happening? I feel like at some point in playtest, Dan Miller just screamed Schnell. And
Yeah.
And it was like a recurring theme in every playtest.
Because it means faster, right? Or whatever. It's just
Yeah.
like, Schnell!
Yeah.
The Schnell logo persisted from the campaign and it became a tagline. We can take a look at some of the prototype videos. We've got Andy from the VFX and Spec Ops team. If we want to go to that video, this is one of the really early prototypes. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, so we started off by looking at some of the look dev that VV did for us. As you can see, that the really nice, beautiful trail that you see on screen. VV did a great job in the beginning, kind of working out the Armory effect. And we wanted to make sure that it's, first of all, visible to our players, and that players understand that this is a very important object. And we're slowly just working the pieces, layering on the effects, and just trying to make sure that it's cool and it's also recognizable so that our players know. And you can see, like, for Destiny, we're trying to work in a lot of the colors into the game. So, you know, oftentimes we want to reserve a lot of the color palettes, so that way the colors are not too crazy, and that way players, when they play the game, they understand that the hazard, and they understand what's important and what's, you know, to be avoided.
Mm-hmm.
You also worked on the receptacle for this, right?
Yes, yeah.
Can we go to that video?
Sure.
Sweet.
Yeah, so for this encounter, because players will be dunking the object into the receptacle, and we wanted to really make this moment a very special moment for players because it's one of the mission, raid objectives. So we looked at really trying to like make the animation of the receptacle really cool, that it opens up and it greets the players, so that way players understand that, oh, this is the objective, that I should be doing this. And so we looked at concepts from, like, you know, movies like Iron Man, Transformers, to kind of showcase that the Fallen technology, where it's a lot of, you know, put together technology that they're very small pieces and they animate, they move, they tumble. And so just really just trying to like sell that language of like, this is high tech, you know, or this is Fallen technology, and just kind of give you that foreign alien look to the Fallen.
And provide those cues to players. I mean, solving these puzzles, you know, figuring out the riddle is a huge component of the raid, and when the environment interacts with you, it provides those crucial cues
Right.
to let players know how to proceed.
Yeah,
Right,
I remember
Deej.
this came on pretty late, and I remember up until that point it was just sort of a static object, and you know, the design team is familiar with it, so we're assuming that people recognize it. And I remember you almost talking about it like it was a person or a living thing, where you talked about it, you want it to greet you and react to your presence. It's like confirming that you're doing the right thing, giving you that feedback.
And it's an ongoing process of trying to make the world more lively, right? Because this is a world that's ever evolving, so we want to add some personality to the world.
Mm-hmm.
We also have the early HoloMap prototype.
Yeah, so for the map, it's a challenge because we want to do something completely new that players have never seen before in the raid, and we're always striving to innovate. So this time around, we thought, hey, it'd be really cool that we stumble upon this Fallen technology, that they're using this hologram map to track where things are going in the city, and then players can also see themselves in the map. And the challenge really is to kind of make sure that the map, again, is readable from a distance, so that way our players can walk up to the map, do a 360 and moonwalk away, and still see that, you know, what they're doing in the game. And so we try to like limit the amount of noise in the map, and we try to use color theories to sell the idea that, okay, these are the friendly units, these are the hostile units, so that way, because combat is going off nonstop, and we want to really make sure that, you know, you can get a good read just by looking at it, and you know what's happening in the game, and you can communicate to your fire team members that, oh, you need to go to point A or point B. And so I feel that, you know, I think the map accomplished that in the raid. And shout out to Darren Lancy and Tommy Mabe. They did a really great job trying to flesh out a map and polish the map.
I'm really glad we got this mechanic into the game. It was something that was kind of on the cutting room floor from an earlier raid. Jake Meyer, technical designer on the team, had been working on this and trying to incorporate it into an earlier experience, and we just sort of couldn't find the right place for it. Like going into this raid, we had sort of the sensibilities of the team really informed what we were trying to do. Like we ended up with a more action-focused, like Dan Miller and Brendan Thorne, their sensibilities definitely pushed us in that direction. And from a mechanical standpoint, like having Last Wish and Gluttony lean heavily into this like obfuscated symbol, informational problem solving.
Gluttony is Eater of Worlds, right?
Leviathan,
Leviathan,
sorry. Gluttony is
sorry.
the code name for the Leviathan raid.
Right.
But with the map, we knew we needed to maintain that coordination mechanic. And so we wanted to create this role where there's like a battlefield commander who's at the center, and they must relay the information to their teammates about where to go and what to do. But we wanted the presentation of that to be very straightforward. You know, like the callouts are numbered. There's no deciphering that has to take place. You tell people where they're at and where they need to go. Yeah, I'm really happy with how this turned out.
Any other pre-production that you want to show off before we play?
Well, when we were mapping out these city streets, what we did was we looked at a bunch of major cities and specifically areas in Tokyo and in San Francisco, especially San Francisco, because we like the elevation changes.
Yeah.
We simplified it down and then made the buildings more important for verticality. But that shows in this like early mass out. And then we have a high-res image here too of the Berserker. And we're gonna see all of this in a little bit when they start the encounter. And this was Roderick Wise's work. This is the high-res of the Berserker combatant.
Yeah, and again, this was the conversations with the combatants team, wanting to explore that. Like, what does a less scrappy, like high-tech version of Fallen look like? He's all kitted out in his suit, and he's got abilities and powers that feel very technology focused, as opposed to more of the mystical stuff that we've done in the past, or where it's rusted and old and it's sort of put together.
Working with Brian Willey on the shooting the back and the front to make sure your teammates are working together.
The kind of slowing mechanic and all that. Took some iteration.
We can jump into it.
Yeah.
Let's jump into it. Cool. We are good to go. You can holster that knife, pull out your gun, and get into the fight. As the playthrough begins, just one show programming note. Our chat is in sub-only mode. You can think of it as the contrivance of an internet swear jar, so please do be excellent to each other in chat. Those of you who do subscribe to us, we take your hard-earned dollars and we contribute them to our Bungie Foundation. Our mission is to ease distress and suffering in children who are in the hospital. We drop iPads into their hands, we provide them with games, and we provide them with the healing power of entertainment. So thank you so much if you do choose to sub to us, and thanks for being in chat. Let the raiding begin.
Yeah, so I don't know, we talk a bit about the environment and like how we ended up with this city layout and what the design and art decisions were that went into it. One thing that becomes a theme in this raid, again, I'm really happy with the way it turned out, is the sort of open, mechanically open loops that allow for sort of strategic and tactical flexibility. So you may have a series of mechanics that are required to progress the encounter, right? Step A leads to B, and B leads to C. But you're open to begin that loop again before it's completed. So you can kind of work in around and have multiple teams working in parallel. And the city, I think the layout also speaks to that, where we want it to be open. Map knowledge is really critical. Players that learn where the elements and the spaces are, that's going to be required for success.
And really early on, I think we decided we wanted this to be our vehicle raid, right?
Yeah, totally.
So that played into all of the map designs.
Yeah, I love how there's sort of the street level where you're Sparrow, like you're heading out to find the next target. You're jumping on your Sparrow, cruising over there, and then you ditch it and fight them. And then you've got the sort of rooftop level, which is all parkour and player movement focused with the jumping and mantling and class abilities.
I think the idea of like hunting from rooftop was one of the things that we kind of pitched around when we first trying to brainstorm on what we do in this encounter.
Yeah, and I love the way that you guys incorporated the fallen architecture, like this sort, like there's the very regimented rectilinear city architecture, and then the fallen palette is sort of overlaid on that, contrasting it well.
Right. Brandon Campbell came on and did a great job polishing this bubble. And then looking at the holo map, especially after seeing the prototype, you can see how much it cleaned up visually for readability.
Yeah, definitely. And this is, a lesson for those aspiring artists out there. And you notice that for the map, we reserved a very hostile color, the orange and red for enemy combatants. And we reserved the greenish tone that is more friendlier to showcase that, they're your friends on the map. And for the objectives, like, your fire team carrying the relic, we showed it with yellow, which is kind of like a caution sign. So that way, again, it's all for readability, so that way our players will, at a snap, understand that, okay, this is a situation, and this is how we're going to react to it, and this is how we're going to communicate with the fire team.
Mm-hmm. We did the same thing with lighting and kind of like props around too, as well as you can see in like the holo map, there's like the round buildings and stuff like that. So there's all these different cues that allow people to more easily gain map knowledge. And that was a lot of iteration to come to, but I think we did a really good job.
It's interesting to hear designers talk about all of the very specific and deliberate decisions that you make that could inform player behavior, could even sort of guide the way people interact with those activities that it might be completely unconscious to us. Right. And the psychology that goes into the work, and just sort of utilizing some of the different languages of color that we use in our real life. Like you talk about yellow meaning caution and red meaning danger. And
Yeah, we just saw one group of players going to deliver one of the batteries, and we wanted to create that sort of escort experience, right? Where once you picked up the battery, you become a critical component of the team and progressing the encounter, but you're also sort of helpless. You can't fight effectively, and so that enables this role for someone to come with you, protect you on your way, and clear out the enemies that are at your destination. Yeah, I love the scope of the city. I love that you're not necessarily going to see it every time you play, right? Like the random elements of the encounter, you don't know where you're going to start, you don't know where you're going to end. Really rewards people that understand the best route from A to B in all sort of contexts.
And I think early on, as we were developing the city, there was this idea that we're going to have landmarks, very recognizable buildings. I mean, the Chanel sign was one of the most recognizable landmark in this encounter.
The ball ship and...
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. The kind of the radio tower area on the other side, and then the domed building on the south. I'll just say that we used Chanel as our North Tower. Mm-hmm. It was our North Star.
Chanel.
You also pushed the architectural style of that one plaza to be very contrasting to the others, so it's recognizable.
Yeah, we borrowed a lot of architecture from other areas of the last city, and our palette team builds a lot of really cool stuff for us.
And I think this is the strength of our art team, to support the design while not sacrificing the art bar. So that way, the art and design kind of melt together to create this incredible experience as players play through the encounter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I remember talking through initially, do we want to always leave the same place and sort of rotate it on a calendar with the activity? But ended up really liking the idea of connecting this space to the maze below, mm-hmm. and having a sort of random entry point to a maze being interesting and keeping it fresh on repeated playthrough. I love that I'm seeing the tank in the background there.
Yep. We wanted to get the tank in there. We made sure it could get through all the streets and you could have some fun with it.
I love the tank.
Before they move to the next encounter?
Yep. What do we want to do? We want to take a break with our fire team before we move on to the next encounter?
Yeah.
What do you want to accomplish?
We're going to swap in our next discipline representative, or
Your call.
all right.
Let's do it.
Andy, is there anything else you wanted to highlight before you jump off stream?
No, I'm just...
Even from later encounters?
Yeah, so again, you'll see repeatedly in the encounter that there are a lot of props in the encounter throughout the raid that are animating. They come alive, and hopefully you'll see more of those in the future as well.
We could probably throw up the next video. Just it's in the next sewer area, but Andy worked on this as well. The melee button. That's what starts the sewer. What opens the final boss encounter area.
All right, so you can see we're trying to simplify a lot of the pieces, so that way it's not too noisy. So it's not like Transformers where we're not going to micro-bait the whole thing, right? So we wanted to make sure that it's cool. It opens up and it offers this kind of like mystery, mystery box. You don't know what's in there, right? You don't know what's going to happen if you stick your hand in it. So it kind of adds that little piece of narrative that puts in the player's head as they play through the raid. And these are some of the earlier prototype of the buttons you'll be punching in the sewer.
And again, green means safe.
Right.
If that was red, I probably wouldn't want to interact with it.
Right.
So
those are great. The way they open and close, it sort of repeats that theme that the other station uses. And then it also allowed us to swap out the context inside. So there's the case that has the two hands, sort of requires or suggests the requirement of simultaneous hit.
Right.
And then later it contains the different phase buffs.
Right. And a little piece of the design problem is that because the thing is now it's closed and it opens up until you approach it, so players cannot really read from a distance of what's required. And you'll see in later encounters that it becomes a design choice that we decided to not let players to see from afar of what the colors are for the polarity.
Right.
So that way it adds an extra layer of challenge.
It enforces player position. They have to be present.
And once again, this is all coming back to art and design coming together to craft this experience and challenge. So that way, players are always on their toe.
Andy, thank you so much for representing all the visual effects artists at Bungie and giving our players a sense of how your specific discipline contributes to gameplay. It's an interesting conversation to have. For our next encounter, we are going to be focusing on...
Yeah, we're going to have someone to represent the audio discipline.
All right. Let's change out the fourth chair. Thank you again so much, Andy.
Oh no. Hi.
And as our fire team makes their way into the next encounter, it's our pleasure to introduce to you an audio designer on the Scourge of the Past raid. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Well, I am Jenny Labonte, and I am a sound designer here, and I work on primarily ambience, interactive device objects, and UI.
Yeah, so
Fantastic.
we would meet with Jenny and the rest of the audio designers like Carson Rohan and stuff like that, like once a week to try to go over like, this is what we're designing right now, and how does that affect you guys?
Yeah.
And what do you guys want?
And everything affected us.
Everything-
Pretty much everything needs
affects
audio
them.
with any kind of change that comes in, and just figuring out how it's actually going to be built. And a lot of it on the sound design side is more than just creating the sounds, but it's figuring out how it's going to be implemented and actually interact with the character. And we have to build it that way so it's broken up. Like with the melee button, it actually has 6 separate components of audio instead of just like one sound. What's this camera? Okay. Gotcha. But yeah, and yeah, it's everything's a little more kind of broken up than just like one sound to a device that you may think going into it, which is kind of the fun part of putting it together piece by piece that way.
One of the big challenges is like our teams are too big to be co-located and sitting right next to each other, and so Catherine's facilitating that interaction, and we're constantly trying to keep each other up to date on where we're at with what's changed, what's ready to go into the next phase of production. All that coordination is critical.
Yeah, thanks.
Fantastic. Well, let's delve deeper into the activity and we can talk about everything that people are seeing and playing with some special attention paid to audio, of course.
Yeah, so I can sort of set this up a little bit. Dan Miller was the designer that owned this experience. And we all, whenever we're building an encounter, we try to come up with like an experience statement at first that really encapsulates what it's about,
Yeah.
so that everyone understands what we're building. and there's a clear goal, and we can ask ourselves when we're adding a component, does this meet the goals or not? And so we had Dan's idea, to race speeders through the underground tunnel. We wanted this to be like an exciting thrill ride. And I give a ton of credit to Dan for understanding like the emotional impact of being pursued here by this servitor.
And Frank Robbins was our world artist who really built the roller coaster through this space, and I think it came out fantastic.
I mean, he pretty much on his own came up with all of the twists and turns, and I think there's some really interesting subtleties where you need to let off the gas and slow down here and speed up there, and there's sort of tricks to the course.
And it's a little hard to hear with all the combat going on, but I did try to add some kind of like whooshes for sense of speed in there, so you kind of really feel like you're, getting a good amount of speed going through there, and it kind of adds to the adrenaline of being chased by this giant servitor. But yeah, it gets a little crazy, of course, but.
I know in the previous bubble even we had conversations about like the atmosphere, right? What the player's hearing when there's no combat going on.
Yeah.
It makes the city feel alive.
Yeah, and that's really like in between these heavy combat areas, it really was a chance to kind of shine with ambience, and I wanted to make it as creepy as possible to give that like kind of claustrophobic feeling in here. And there's some weird sounds, I would say.
Sounds great.
It sounds great. There's like some grizzly bear pigs.
Say what now?
Yep, it's really technical. Grizzly bear pigs. Just some kind of like pitched down baby groans and crying that is really creepy when it's reversed, and just kind of playing off in the distance where it's the unknown, like what the hell's in this cave, like the depths of. You don't know what's behind any corner. But then as you do kind of get closer to maybe like where you're supposed to be going, you'll start to hear maybe some thuds to let you know you're in the right direction and all that kind of stuff.
It's interesting to hear you talk about something as simple as the perception of speed. It's like if you're moving fast, you should understand that you're going fast. If things are, rushing past the camera eye at a great clip, you're going fast. But to add just that additional visceral element of the sound of speed is an interesting consideration.
Right.
And these are things that we might not even be thinking about when we're playing. Our imaginations are rooted in the world of the game, and all I'm thinking is, I like to go fast. But there's so many different components that go into sort of solidifying that emotion, and that's something that a player like me definitely appreciates.
Some of the stuff that we just saw there happening during the race, like we have a design pillar for the raid activity that is that you're always grateful to your fire team, and you can see that being violated to some extent here, where in the sewer race you're bumping people out of the way and sort of jockeying position, but it was apparent very early on that this was hilarious and going to be a great experience that people were gonna love. We worked with Bill Gross. He's a sandbox designer here that's been working on the vehicles since D1. At the start of all this, we went to him and we're like, hey, we're thinking about adding sparrows and tanks to the raid. What can we do here? What's the design space? And he came to a play test. And like you saw there, someone get shredded when they encountered those fallen. Well, there's some tuning that goes on under the hood with the combatants that make them actually more lethal when you get on your sparrow, because you're a fast-moving target. We need to compensate for that. And it seemed like that was really an area we could create this unique perk that negates some of that effect. And like you combine that with the fast respawn time, and we felt like we were going to have potentially the best sparrow in the game with all those elements coming together. Because like when you're in the city in the first encounter or the last encounter or here, getting blasted off your sparrow, really something we want to give players a way to overcome through the gear chase.
So in creating ambience, Jenny, you're blending different types of sound effects. Where do the ideas come from to pick the source of those materials and to blend them together? I mean, it's kind of a crazy journey that you go on as a designer.
Yeah, it really is. I guess it depends on the environment. And I love horror movies more than anything, so I kind of have a lot to kind of pull from by what I've seen, the terrible things I've seen. And you just kind of start looking through and putting things together and pitch shifting things and just trying to make it sound uncomfortable and disturbing if it needs it. And I felt like this kind of needed it because there's not much going on here. You're kind of wandering because it's a maze. So just, yeah, the fear of the unknown is always scary and kind of, yeah, you just, it's a lot of trial and error of seeing what works and what weird things you can come up with.
And that suits world art goals here as well. When we add these maze-like sections, what we're trying to do is give the player the feeling of forging the path, because if they just have a very obvious, straightforward way of getting through the raid, it doesn't feel as much like you're the first Guardian to be taking this adventure.
Yeah. You know, Catherine, in my conversations with audio designers, they often lament the fact that they're the last people to get the game. You know, it's like, we've made our game, go put sound on it now. What have we been able to do in terms of collaboration to get audio design involved in the process sooner? Because it sounds like Jenny had a lot to go on and to start doing some of that work during development.
Yeah, I think it was like even July or something like that, we started meeting with the audio team and going over like, hey, here's kind of what we were expecting and like how many bubbles we're gonna have, and like started meeting on a regular basis in order to kind of make sure that you guys were kept up to date. And we are like, hey, what if we did this thing with a giant flaming servitor?
We're like, no,
and you're like, okay,
We'll do it.
we'll deal with it.
Yeah. No, I think it works out because as long as we kind of know the direction, we can start kind of iterating and creating ideas of our own and prototyping our own kind of things. And then if the design does tweak a little bit, I mean, we at least have something that we can start working off of. Because I know, yeah, it was working a lot with Andrew and Andy on a lot of the things they were working on, just a lot of communication. And, you know, they're difficult to work with sometimes, but no, it's great. except for him, yeah.
Except for this guy. Yeah.
Well, we hit challenges like even in this area, the vault is so close to the upper area, and those are two very different ambient.
Soundscapes, yeah.
Yeah.
And we had
There's a lot of hospitality in this raid. I mean,
Yeah, it's
that's
so
a recurring
nice.
theme on our
Everybody's
fight.
making cocoa for each other.
Breaking
Cocoa.
bread together.
That last section we're exploring the cave, that was sort of a late addition. Like we had the high adrenaline sparrow race section, and we knew we wanted to sort of shift gears pacing wise, and like you said, provide that experience that I think is really unique to raids. Like I think about the very first time I played a raid and I entered into a maze with my fire team, and just like the absolute terror of getting left behind and then having to tell someone like, I'm lost, please come back and get me. It's like in my mind a quintessential raid experience, and then the audio is doing a ton to reinforce that anxiety and isolation of being in that environment.
I think it's also cool when an artist can bring their personal passion into their work. So if the raid team consults with you and they say, hey, we're going to need just some ambience for this raid, and you say, okay, well, where are we going? They're like, well, we're going into a dark cave. And it's like, oh, cool.
And I'm like,
I love horror movies. Yeah, you're in luck. I
so
love horror.
happy. Yeah.
What are some of your favorite horror movies?
Well, for this one particularly, I was inspired by The Descent.
Oh, God.
Because
Yeah.
I was just like, that's perfect.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I would see that being as, just lost in the depths of God knows what. Yeah, like Martyrs. I mean, I could go on and on, but I won't. But yeah, any scary setting, I would love to do the ambience for, and I love it. Like Dreaming City, there's a lot of creepy stuff in there too, and I loved working on that kind of thing.
Nice. And you know, we're dropping names as often as we can, but it certainly should be said that every single person in these seats represents an entire team at Bungie. There's no, one thing that one person accomplishes. It's very rare that that happens. We've got many, many skilled and talented people here, but there are only so many chairs on set and only so many microphones. So I really appreciate you representing the audio design discipline for you and all of your peers.
Karsten Rohan was responsible for the servitor, and he did an amazing job on just like the voice and everything creepy and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, meeting with Zach Thomas as well, and like just it
all
seems
the
like the
bosses.
characters are this opportunity for you guys to really bring a presence into the environment, into the world. It's great.
Definitely.
Cool.
Our fire team is hanging out, waiting to begin the next encounter.
Okay, yeah, let's make our swap and.
All right. Jenny, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny.
So for this next encounter, our focus is going to be on narrative design. Catherine, talk to me, explain for somebody who might not be familiar with the term narrative design, what's everything that goes into that?
Well, I could talk about that, or we could have our friend talk about that.
All right,
who's
well,
an
let's
experienced
have our friend
narrative guy.
introduce himself to our audience.
Hi.
Hey. Hi, I'm Adam Miller. I'm a senior writer at Bungie, and I helped build the narrative for Black Armory.
How would you define narrative to someone who's not as familiar with all of the fancy terms that we use to talk about game design?
Pretty much anything story related or character related throughout the release.
Okay.
Yeah, anything that touches any of the lore or any plot stuff, any story stuff. I mean, like, it's all over. It's all over the release. It's hard to explain.
Yeah.
In many ways, it's like audio because it's just like it touches everything. Like the
Yeah.
the way you progress through the raid. Like we worked a lot with Adam and Guillaume Colombe to understand like, hey, what are we doing as we're going through here? What are the narrative goals of this? And we very early on like created a set of very high level like. This is our goal in the end here. This is what we're going for, and we kept checking in with you and being like, hey, what's going on? And hey, here's something that we've worked on. Can you help us like contextualize this? And
Right, and I would say that like the really interesting thing about narrative, especially when it comes to the raid, right, is like we have influence kind of everywhere within the raid, right, like in strings, and I don't think we had dialogue in this one. I think we
There's
just
an
have the
opening.
there's like a
opening.
line
We
at
have
the opening with Ada.
But because the raids are such a specific beast, we sort of have to build narrative into these things like anywhere we can, right? So.
Well, and on the team, like Andrew and I, like I'm focused on the mechanics, and Andrew's thinking about the player journey. But the narrative team really provides the context that fits us into the release, you know. And like, I may have a simple understanding. What's the raid going to be? You're going to go to a place and you're going to kill a thing. And that's not necessarily a compelling narrative. And so we lean on the narrative team to help flesh that out and contextualize it in the world. And like you think about everything that the player interacts with has to be named. And that's all part of telling the story. If it's the string on an interactable, or when you get killed, there's a string that tells you who killed you, or the guns and their names, like
Or
all
the tethering mechanic.
Right,
Or,
like all of that is sort of building the concept of the world that you exist in. Super critical, and the designers, like we make very, like the dev names for things are very on the nose. It describes what the thing's function is, but we understand we can't ship that.
Yeah, yeah. We usually we go in and then we sort of recontextualize everything to make sense to the narrative that we're trying to tell. And like a good example of that would be sort of all the combatant names that we did within the raid, right? Like we wanted to tell a story about the Kel's Scourge, but we really didn't have a lot of runway to tell that story. So we utilized names to really kind of exemplify like anarchy, and that kind of like metalness that the Kel's Scourge is supposed to have. So you'd see like, the servitor is a blazed glory, and the mech is Insurrection Prime, and it's all designed to be a little on the nose and a little in your face, but it tells the story of who these people are, and that's when it comes to the raid, that's a lot of where our storytelling comes from. So
Yeah, subtle cues.
the subtle
Yeah,
cues.
I mean, this isn't entirely a linear story. It's not like we crack open a book and sit next to the fire and say, let me tell you a story. It's like you're in combat, and there's action and explosions all around you. So to weave that through is a delicate art form. Shall we go back to our fire team, get out there into the mix? And
We got
Adam
a couple slides if we want to look at those
Yeah,
real
we
quick.
absolutely do. Let's take a look at some more pre-production. What are we going to look at here?
This was another shot of our mass out where we were trying to figure out how big the crater should be. And you can see we got the tank in there because we need to know if it feels good to drive across the entire gameplay space. This was a really fun part of the production process.
I love this shot because it, like for me, it, in a lot of ways, sort of encapsulates, showing up with the tank, coming over this ridge, and like bringing the heavy artillery into the encounter. And very early on, there was a bunch of concern from a design standpoint of like, what does it mean to add this component to the encounter? When you get into it, you sort of step out of your character and you step out of your sandbox, But I felt pretty strongly that it was going to be a compelling experience, and the chaos that they sort of bring to the encounter.
And in this early mass out, you can see the crater is right next door to the city, and at one point that was the case where players would end up in the crater just adjacent to the city, but that didn't feel compelling. It felt weird that you could look out into the crater and be like, well, the vault's right there, why don't we just go to it? So we added the Sparrow section, and it added a lot of pacing and a lot of player journey. We've got another prototype video of the Tether VFX, and as Andy was talking about earlier, Tommy Mabe was working on this. I thought this was really well done. It's a different feel to a lot of VFX we've done so far. It's a new flavor.
It also helps tell that story of what Brian was talking to me about, where these Fallen are a little bit more technologically advanced. They're not just sheathed in ether. There's obviously some dark magic, indecipherable from technology at work here, sort of letting you know that the foe that you're fighting in this raid is a little bit more formidable than some of the Fallen you've faced in the past.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you'll even see that in some of the ways in which we named, like, the buffs in this encounter, and the next one, and like the parallel and the angular and that kind of stuff. Like you actually, if you're playing through all of Black Armory, you would see the same effect throughout the forges and the enemies of the Kel Scourge and stuff outside of the raid. The idea being, that this was like stolen technology, sort of, that the Kel Scourge have taken from the Black Armory and reutilized for their own purposes, and it was yet another storytelling technique that we had to kind of attach the raid to the rest of the release.
Yeah, Dan Miller again owned this encounter, and this Tether Mechanic was born out of his idea for this play space that a number of players are required to go down into is circular, and there are multiple points on the ring where you have to acquire this charge effectively, this phase buff, and then for optimal efficiency, which actually he's going to scramble the location of the next one that you need, and then it becomes this problem of like, well, I can't go past my friend because now that I'm charged, if I come near them, we'll both explode, which is makes a really interesting overlap of the mechanic and the layout. And then later in the next encounter, we sort of reuse this visual language and get more mileage out of the mechanic and the stuff that we created.
With that, are we ready to
Yeah, we can
demonstrate
go back to the encounter.
All right. Fire team, weapons free.
And all of that VFX has a language, so they're thinking about, we need a shield that makes the boss immune at certain points, or that players can walk into and shoot the capo.
The Berserker.
The Berserker, yep.
Berserker.
Yeah, that was our
right.
our dev name.
Hear that, everybody? We're using code names.
Well, that sort of came, like the code name Capo is short for Capo Regime, which is like a mafia term that describes this like layer of the organization that's not the boss, but it's below the boss. And like that's where our head was at in terms of the theming, and like trying to represent the sort of syndicate nature of the faction.
Right.
It's a recurring theme on these streams where I can remember times when we've had people in these seats saying, well, we did a lot of our early sandbox tuning on Factory, so that's always the place that we return to when we wanted to refine the sandbox. And we'd have to look at the camera and go, Factory is rusted lands. So as we come up with our own code names to guide development, what's it like when they kind of take the game and put it on your desk and say, all these code names can be changed, go ahead and tell a story?
It's a little overwhelming, but it's also exciting. It really gives us the opportunity to kind of take what's there and build a compelling narrative out of it.
It's almost like creating a brand, isn't it? Like,
It is, yeah. It's an interesting challenge, because it's one of the situations where we sort of come in as a layer on top and build the narrative on top of sort of what's already there, which is a unique challenge in of itself to fit in with everything else that we're doing. But it's exciting and it's fun, and trying to figure out the name for the capo took a little while.
Yeah.
But we really, again, I think one of the things too is, we were sort of creating the syndicate and these characters and stuff on a pretty short timetable. So when we got to the point of building the raid, or building this stuff for the raid, we were still kind of figuring out who these characters were ourselves.
Yeah.
And that presented some challenges. So we went through a lot of iteration to try and figure out what we wanted to call like the Berserkers and the mech and all the rest of that. But yeah, it's overwhelming, but it's satisfying in the end.
Yeah. Well, it's a huge responsibility in terms of world building, the names that you give to a thing, whether it's
Yeah.
Millennium Falcon or Shadowfax,
Sure.
or I mean, these things can become iconic, and these names are going to stick, and they're going to
Yeah.
tell people things, right?
That's actually, yeah, if for anybody who has seen the raid exotic Anarchy, that was probably the last thing, or one of the last things that we actually named.
Yeah.
Largely because we went through so many different names for it that were like, exciting and big and sounded crazy. And I kept, myself and Guillaume kept coming back to Anarchy as like a starting point because nothing was really actually fitting. And we kept saying like, Anarchy, that doesn't sound big enough. That doesn't sound exciting enough. And we sort of took it to some of the other members of the writing team and they were just like, yeah, sounds great.
Sounds great.
I kind of like had this panic the whole time that was like, we're not going to figure out the name for this exotic and nobody's going to remember it. And we put it out and it like totally works. But, it takes it sometimes getting out into the wild to really know.
That you did okay.
that it's fine.
You're like, yes, this
It
works.
can be hard
this
to
is fine.
convince yourself that your first idea is the best.
Exactly.
But a lot of times, simplicity is the best tactic. I mean, we think about some
Sure.
of our other exotic weapons, like Truth
Right.
or Red Death, and sometimes that can even be the seed of creativity, where somebody
Right.
at Bungie would say, I want to make sure there's an exotic weapon in Destiny called Red Death. Go from there, right?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, and with like Anarchy in particular, it was a specific challenge because, again, we only have so many story channels to tell the story of Black Armory. So we really wanted to make sure that like this gun was a really great representation all around with the lore and the name and everything of who these people are. And, maybe a little on the nose, but I think it works.
Works. It's iconic. It's memorable.
Yeah.
It's easily
It's easy
pronounceable.
to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, along those lines, we saw players just now getting the phase buffs down below from the switches, and I remember like our Velveeta group who's playing now, bringing them in and having them blind test the raid, and the initial version of that. I don't think we had final VFX for the object, and we additionally didn't have final strings, and there was a bunch of confusion and difficulty in talking about who had what, and it wasn't until the more final VFX of the sphere and the pyramid and the cube came online that we started to map, like understand the problem of like, well, if I have circle, like we can't just call it circle. That's not a fictionally contextualized name. And there was like this struggle of getting something that sounded real within the fiction of the game that also related directly to the visuals that you were seeing and was intuitive and immediately understandable by players that it didn't contribute to a communication challenge.
Right. Yeah, we went through a lot of iteration on that just to make sure that we got that right. And yeah, that was like a little more of a unique challenge than just like, naming an exotic or something, right? Because
Yep.
you're right.
Remember you coming
It
to
lives
play
in
test.
it lives in the world. Like it is
it
part of the
lives in-
experience.
Exactly. Yeah. Like it has to fictionally make sense, but it also has to be very like clear and concise for players, right? So
I think you did a great job.
thank you.
Yeah.
I think you did a great job.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
There's a ton of stuff going on with this encounter that I want to touch on. Yeah, again, so Dan being responsible here and
Dan Miller.
Dan Miller, and my sort of direction to the team being like, let's get the tanks and the vehicles, let's make them a focus. And initially, because there was concern about like, what does that mean? I had said like, well, they're not required. They're a useful tool. But Dan sort of went right forward. No, they're totally required. They're going to be part of the mechanical loop. I think this worked out really well, like in terms of pacing of the overall experience, where the tanks are sort of a big surprise and a delight at this point in the activity the first time you played it. And he goes full throttle with them. You can get 3 of them up at once, and they're all circling the center, and just the total chaos of it. And then for the final encounter, because it has more elements in play, we sort of ease back on the focus on that element. I think that worked out really well. And then just the overall structure too has this very simple design where you have the 2 teams that are codependent on each other, where you have to split up, And then for the bottom team to leave, the top team has to do its job. And I feel like it's really successful, very simple structure to the encounter that leans heavily into the sandbox and what's happening with players. They're trapped in confined spaces with AI, or they've got to get from one location to another quickly. And all this leads to this sort of failure points that then create opportunity for pulling it out of the fire and like saving your buddy and making the heroic play.
Yeah. And also make for highly cooperative and collaborative experiences, which I
Yeah.
think are the core, or is one of the cores of like raid activities, which is like you have to have like you have to work together
Yeah,
with
exactly.
people.
In our playtest, we have sort of the talking test. Like if we're able to sit there and play the encounter without saying anything, it's a direct indication of not having enough coordination mechanics being required.
That's the expectation we've always set for raids.
Yeah.
Bring your communication, bring your teamwork, bring
Yeah.
your collaborative problem solving. Our fire team was having another tea party in the destination. I can only assume that means that they are waiting for their date with the final boss.
All right, let's do it.
All right. And with that, I believe that we're going to take a deep dive into combatant design, are we not?
That's right. We've got a representative from the boss's team.
Adam, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for representing all of narrative design. There are many great storytellers at Bungie, and there's many different ways that they weave those ideas and themes into our games. So thank you for the work
Very
that you
true.
and all of your peers do.
course.
And thanks for joining us on set to give us some insight on that.
Awesome. Thank you, Teach.
We're going to swipe out the fourth chair at this point, and we're going to bring in combatant design.
Well, we got to give a shout out on this space.
Yeah.
Ray Broskovac, Matt Turner, and Noah Thompson all lent their skills to the world. And also Ryan Kamens was our lighting artist on the raid, and he did a phenomenal job in the city bringing that to life, and especially making it feel like kind of an abandoned area, but also like it's been infiltrated by the Fallen. And the crater area provides a challenge as well. When you have this big open expanse, the sun creates a lot of shadow, and shadow costs performance, so it's a technical challenge.
I remember when we were first talking about going to the city and trying to figure out like what's the hook or what's the really compelling thing that players don't expect to discover, and having some concern about like it's just a ruined city. You maybe have seen this in other games, but I think like having the traveler overhead and just sort of like the grandeur of it, and players actually haven't been to a place like this in Destiny.
You've certainly been looking at it for long enough.
And speaking of lighting, this was a fun little moment where you arrive in the city at sunset. It's nighttime during the encounter. You go into the sewer. When you come back out, it's sunrise. And of course, Eric Castle's just blowing it away on Skybox again.
Yeah, and speaking to Ray's contribution, I think he really succeeded taking the design goals of having this sort of open layout. Similar, like it sort of repeats the theme of the city, but it's a much more constrained set now. Like the encounter is more focused. We want to make the boss the centerpiece, and there was a ton of consideration that went into its scale and sort of sight lines and distance to the boss. It all came together really well.
Well, let's give it up for Nigel for these sweet establishing shots. It's difficult to find somebody who's a half warrior, half cinematographer. So thanks for giving us a sweet look at the environment. And we're going to fight a boss, yeah?
Yeah.
And before we do that, let's introduce you to our combatant lead. You are...
I am Matt Finley, the combatants lead at Bungie. For Scourge of the Past, I was the feature lead on the Bosses team. The Bosses team is a group of content creators, designers, 3D artists, animators, VFX, and some tests. And we're a small team that focuses on building the boss experiences.
Takes a lot of people to build a boss.
It does. It does.
Well, thank you for being here to represent them and your shared creative process. What are we going to fight today?
Insurrection Prime, whose working name was Mechatroid the Bombastic. We wish stuck, but we know it had to change for story reason.
Yeah.
So we got Mechatroid. When we started...
Do we want to pull up concepts?
Yeah, it was some some concepts like...
So Susan Luo did a bunch of our early mecha concepts, or mech concepts.
Mech concept. Yeah, we had some designs from Raid of like, we want an encounter like this, we move around like this, and people were like, can we build a giant mech? And we're like, no, there's no way we can build a giant mech. That's crazy. And then we started figuring out, started hacking some stuff together, and it was like, yeah, I totally think we could do it. And so Susan started with this, and we took this, and then usually what we do when we're building bosses is we do there's a lot of go back and forth between concept art and then 3D design. And so she took this gave it to Roderick. Roderick started building something, and I think if you skip along, then you can see, okay, they've put that in game, and it fed off of the concept design, and we get that in game. You start getting the 3D model, and then that, again, feeds back into concept. So then we'll draw concept on top of that, and then eventually we'll get to the
Yeah,
final
we'll see Roderick's.
Yeah,
high-res
there's
in a
Roderick's.
second.
That's the actual.
That's the concept.
That's
still.
the concept that he built our final thing on.
Right, Susan's pretty good. Can you go back one slide real quick? So this is actually looking at what design's requirements are, right? This is exploring the weapons needed for the boss to do his wipe, to do his attacks. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all.
Yeah, sure. Again, we had this concept of this fallen syndicate, and they have access to this black armory technology. It's highly advanced, and like, what if they built a weapon platform out of it? It's sort of like, I don't know, Spider Tank 2.0, or like a more advanced.
You mean a fallen walker?
Yeah. And we knew we wanted like multiple weapon systems and weak points, and so that all fed into the concept and design.
Yeah, for visually, we both on this guy and the Berserker, the Capo. We wanted to put both of those elements in, that there was a core piece of black armory tech, something well beyond what the Fallen what you would usually see with the Fallens. And then the Fallen took that and then just kind of put it in a chop shop and hacked all together everything that they could on top of it. And so if you look at the mech, the charging core that sits up on top of it, and the weak spots that you hit to interrupt the abilities, or the weak spots that you hit to break up the shield, those are black armory tech. And then everything built around it is very Fallen. So it's got the...
Yeah, if you want to go to the next slide real quick, it's relevant.
Yeah, it's got the brown of the Spider Tank, the Fallen Walker. All the weapons look very big and chunky, that things that the Fallen would could be seen using. And then on the Berserker, that core piece that you break in the center of him, that's also the black armory tech. So the visual language of that weak spot and the weak spots that you use to break the shield on the mech, we spent a lot of time making sure that those were the same. So when a player saw it on the Berserker, once they encountered the mech, they could put those two things together and know which parts they had to shoot.
So this is another one of Susan's final concepts on the boss, and then we can go forward one slide to Roderick Wise' high-res version of the boss.
Beautiful. Formidable.
Yeah, this got more and more exciting. The more we worked on it, we just, this is fun.
And you've overwritten the narrative, so our chat is alive with Mechatroid the Bombastic.
Mechatroid the Bombastic. Well, so
community already contemplating a parody Twitter account.
Oh,
So
that's-
now you've gone and done
That's
it,
great.
as
Well,
they
so
say.
Mechatroid spawned another name in Destiny, a very famous name. A mistake we made while we were building this.
We'll see that last, right?
Is that last?
I think so.
we're gonna show
Yeah, I think that
eventually?
video is
Okay, I'll
last.
wait. I'll wait
We
for
can
that.
go back to gameplay now, though, and
Sure.
they can pick on the boss.
Yeah. So one of the things we wanted about this moment was just like a giant reveal. Like this whole time, the boss has been down there in the hot tub, and you can't really tell what's going on. And when this activates, we wanted an oh shit moment, and I think we got it with streaming. T-Rex had this thing land on his face. And it was super exciting.
Okay.
That was maybe one of the most rewarding moments of launch day, was seeing,
was.
because we talk about the possibility of someone getting crushed by Thing, and that happened. It was
It totally happened to me in playtest. Like
Did
the
it?
first time,
Yeah.
the first time we animated this whole thing, I was like, "Oh look!
Hey,
Oh
look."
no!"
Thanks for taking one for the team, T-Rex.
We appreciate that.
That was a pivot. Like we had initially planned for like a quick vignette cutscene with the boss, and working like Brendan Thorne is the encounter designer that owned this experience, and we sort of realized late that it wasn't quite working, and he challenged the assumption, like, do we even want to have cinematic? Like, what if we just don't? Just let it be in the sandbox, and that was 100% the right call.
Hey, point of order, as our fire team engages, do you think that they can defeat this boss without dying?
Oh, I'm pretty sure that they can. But
That said, do you want them to?
I'd rather that. I'd like to show off what he does when he kills people.
So for the sake of exploration, for the sake of going
Puts the
behind
arrow
the
on the ground.
scenes, we do want a failure state, fire team, so you are permitted to fail.
Yeah, you can fail.
We
Fail-
will not judge you. You
Fail
will not
well.
be scorned.
Oh don't! Oh no!
Not
that'll
even
work.
going to make it look good. Just, yep, this is fine.
Well, I mean, he's getting a really nice shot right
It
here.
is, it is.
Yeah, he's going through all his abilities.
Yep.
Yeah, so we put multiple abilities on this guy. It was one of the things that was given to us from raid design. They wanted, okay, players should be poking at this guy and making an effect on how he engages with the rest of the fire team so that you could split up your team and do different jobs. So each of these abilities, we thought of, okay, what are the games to kill? What are the games to survive that we want to have the mech push on the other players? And so this one that he's doing right now is hide. Like really, it's suppression. So it's like go and hide. So take aggro from the mech so he doesn't attack your other buddies and go and hide somewhere. And then when he gets up in the air, he negates all of your cover because he can fly up above it and drop down on it. It's like, okay, so keep moving and get into a building or something. And then the rocket attack where he braces down and fires rockets on the ground. Then there's like pattern recognition and movement as well.
You guys were working with Ray to make sure this boss could actually explore the whole space.
Yeah, there were a lot of meetings of trying to make sure that like he could path correctly and like buildings made sense and.
Yeah, so there's a lot of back and forth between a very mobile boss, any boss really, but especially a mobile boss who's going to move around the level a lot, and level design, encounter design. Here's the death.
Goodbye.
The direction given to our effects artist, Glenn, was, we think he should scorch the sky. And we went away, and we came back a week later, and he did that, and we're like, yeah, okay. It's good. Basically, and you're right next to the last city, so everyone you know, everyone in the tower, like, they're all dead. They're all just gone.
Really?
Way to go, raid team.
High stakes. Yeah. Right. You let that happen
Yeah.
just for the purposes of a stream?
You blew it.
All right, back in, weapons free. Show them how it's done.
Yeah, so I want to touch on some things Matt said there in our design process. Like I think that we're at our best when we're sort of handing goals to each other and then letting the creative process of the discipline flesh that out and find the right solution for it. And so, working with Brendan, we had some goals for this boss. Like we knew we wanted it to be mobile. We didn't want it on a stage. We've done a ton of raid bosses that were sort of either completely a state machine and couldn't move about the environment, or they were very constrained to a small spot.
Yeah.
We wanted players to react to its positioning, and you can see this theme between both the Berserker and the mech, where it requires you to get in position relative to the boss, and the boss is free to choose its own facing, and the challenge is being in the right point at the right time. Like with the attacks for the mech boss, the player being targeted is very unlikely or completely unable to stop the attack. Like the interrupt has to come from another player in another direction. And then we wanted to really double down and elaborate on the whole weak point mechanic. Like we sort of had this with Argos in Eater of Worlds, where there's a point where you have to stun it, and Brendan was really keen to expand on that. And he had this concept of like bullfighting, where you have a set of players that are forced to continually engage with the boss. Like we didn't want to end up in a place where we created this amazing character, it's got all this presence, but effectively all you do is hide from it until it's time to damage it. And so between the shield nodes and the kind of counter punching of the weak points, we enforce that continued interaction with the boss.
You have this interesting relationship with the community that kind of comes out in the way you talk about your craft, where there have been a lot of raids. You can think about like what's the difference between Oryx and Crota, and like does the boss stand still and get attacked, or does the boss walk around? And then you can kind of anticipate the way people play these raids.
Yeah.
You've had a lot of time to sit and watch people experience these activities, and it's interesting to hear, at least for me, to hear you talk about anticipating the way people might try to play these activities. It's like a very friendly rivalry.
It spawns like a kind of conversation that people talk about when you're pitching movies. It's like, okay, so what if we had Shirochi with a little bit of Atheon, and like when we're talking about new raid encounters, it's like, oh, let's take this old thing that we did and throw something new on top of it. So we have this big library of stuff that we've done, a bunch of different mechanics, a bunch of different kinds of bosses.
Yeah, and again, Brendan Thorne,
Just murder.
Not in the face.
the encounter designer responsible for this experience.
Oh.
Did they just win?
No,
They
got a
just
sliver.
missed it. Chunk.
Yeah, he really did a great job of putting all the pots on the stove here.
I know. There's like the tiniest sliver.
We're dropping Brendan's name a lot on this stream, and I think it's only appropriate that I sort of let slip that we've been talking to Brendan about a ride-along in the Shattered Throne. So if you're in chat and you'd like to see the Shattered Throne be given the same treatment, we've had Brendan Thorne on stream previously. I think it was for the Leviathan raid-along, but we'll have him back in one of these hot seats soon to talk about his approach to these types of things.
I think it was Kingsfall, right?
Is it Kingsfall? Who knows? It was a time.
It was
I don't know
in
if
the
we-
past.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
So with
though.
this encounter, again, I was trying to highlight some of the design considerations that went into it. Like I said, he's got the task of bringing all the mechanics together in a way that is still manageable and makes for a fun experience. So the hunting of the berserkers is back. So there's a player at the map sort of calling out who needs to go where. But the boss is still the centerpiece, like we just talked about. There's a team that has to stay focused on it. And these are sort of in parallel, right? And you've got the two teams working on their own timeline, and they have to meet up at the same point. Again, bringing the tank element into play. The boss has to get hit with the tank, but that can't happen until his shield is down. And really keeping the boss the centerpiece of it.
I know we got asked this on Twitter, but they wanted to know what our order was for the DPS phase as far as angular continuous parallel.
Yeah.
So back then, we didn't have angular continuous parallel. We just had circle, triangle, square. So the way we were thinking about it was circle is one continuous line, triangle's 3 lines, squares 4 lines. So we would go 1, 3, 4, which was cap. So.
Yeah, and that was an interesting sort of maybe late pivot or iteration that we went through where, again, Dan had conceived of the tether mechanic, Dan Miller, for the previous encounter. And we got to a point here with the DPS phase. The boss is sort of disabled. And again,
There
we
we
want
go.
to keep players engaged and keep them challenged, and they're not just unloading their weapons, right? So Brendan had this idea of the polarity types. And initially there were only 2. And it seemed like we could make that more mechanically rich by adding a 3rd. And it really escalates the complexity of organizing your team.
Sorry. It's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, the boss death was amazing with the little rocket that comes
I
out
love
at the
the
end.
little
Yeah,
rocket.
it's the party rocket.
Party rocket. Pew!
Deaths are a fun place for us to play around and do some cool things. There's the party rocket. There's the servitor ball that pops out. But no one ever looks at it. They look for their loot.
Can't
Dead.
blame
Go
them.
get my loot.
All right,
Go to orbit.
There are many different ways to satisfy all of this effort and activity.
Yeah.
So this was interesting. The idea here is this is the space that we came through before, and the lift was up. And once the boss exits the lift drops back down, but you've got the shutter closed. When you defeat the boss, the shutter opens, the lift is down, and now we can access the Black Armory vault.
And we can
And
get
of course,
the
the Codex was here for the world's first team to be the team that picked up the book.
And that was something that we knew was players going to react very positively to.
6 Coyote.
Nice. Great.
Do you get to keep that?
No. Yes.
Yeah, he's on his live account.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
he's
can
on
see
the-
it,
so-
on the left.
Yeah, we're on
Yeah.
retail, as they say.
And Frank Robbins did another great job on all this Black Armory space.
Vault Abisu, which is the name that
Stuff.
the narrative team gave it. We
So
have
hops.
another fond memory of Vault Abisu from during development. If you show the last slide, I think it is. Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. We call this Tank Hot Tub.
Yep. This was from a playtest.
Yeah, I guess. So early on in development, this is you can see there's a lot of kind of like gray box going on, and I don't even remember what these yellow balls
I
are.
think those were the wipe timer, like a very
Oh, that's
primitive
right. Before we had the actual
indication of the time until you failed.
And so early on, we really wanted the tank mechanic, but we didn't have a way to clean up the tanks at the end. They just kind of hung around. Now they explode. And so after a play test, we were all kind of driving around, and I drove into the vault.
Right, there was no shutter before.
there was no shutter
So the boss
before.
would exit the hole, and you just had this big golf hole, and so of course we had all these tanks
So we all drove them
Yeah.
into the,
piled in.
and it
I mean,
just
the way
became.
I remember this is we were like, we'd finished the playtest, we'd looked at the encounter, and then we would turn to like have the discussion about what worked and what didn't.
And
somebody
somebody's
drove
always,
their tank
yep,
in,
it's,
and then
it
somebody
was
else
me,
drove theirs in.
yep, and then
all of a
Zach,
sudden, you know,
and then I
just a
think
giant pile,
everybody just.
and everyone's laughing. I don't think we talked about the encounter or anything. We just like,
We did. There was totally some feedback because one of the things that we learned, we
gotta
were like,
clean
we
up the
have to
tanks.
clean up the tanks.
Yeah,
We
clean up the
can't
tanks and close the hole.
Close the hole.
But really impressive driving up on top of the other two. So
Yeah.
Crucial function of playtest.
Yeah.
Anything else we want to tell them about Scourge of the Past?
Bosses are
Bosses
well, we
are
got
fun.
bosses are fun.
that
Oh, we had
cool
the video.
additional thing.
Yeah, so we're going through development. We're trying to close this out, and then I get an email that's like, there's a bug in loot, which is inverted spire. A ship's D2 strike that we didn't touch at all. I'm like, how is this possible? And then we get a video of the bug, and then they show me. And this is one of my favorite bug videos of all time because it's, yeah, sure, the boss is going to spawn. Don't worry about it.
This is fine.
This is fine. Swoltheon.
Working as intended.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what had happened is we used a Minotaur to prototype our initial mech. And to do that, we scaled up its rig and its skeleton. And something happened and that got checked in. And then anything that referenced that skeleton became 5 times as big as it was supposed to be. Swoltheon was one of those.
Solian.
One of the hazards of developing in a world with a pretty diverse ecosystem. You know, raids, strikes, crucible. I mean, it's all interconnected. It's all pretty complex. It's just one of the things that we live with.
Yeah.
But thanks for sharing. We don't always show our warts.
I
But,
was really excited when we released that because it showed up in game and we talked about it. And I think the community was like, show us a video. And I'm glad that we released that.
Fixer, it
It's
didn't
pretty
happen.
awesome.
Cool.
Cool.
Well, thanks so much for taking us behind the scenes of the Scourge of the Past raid. This has actually been a great way to bring the Season of the Forge to an end. These activities will still be available to you, but we're about to kick off a new season in Destiny, and you should pay attention to us. Stay tuned on Thursday morning. We're going to have a brand new Bungie Vidoc. We're going to hear from some more developers at Bungie about what we have planned for you in the Season of the Drifter. So stay tuned. Keep your eyes peeled for that. We'll tell you in all of the usual places. And as a closing note, thank you so much for taking us behind the scenes of combatant design. It's interesting to hear all about the cat and mouse game and all about anticipating player behavior and all of the thought and all of the talent that goes into that. So thanks for representing yourself and your team, as well as all of you. So again, this was the just some people from the Scourge of the Past raid design team. And it's been our pleasure to play our game for you today. Thanks so much for being in chat. Thanks for watching and being curious about how we make the things that you play. I'm Deej. It's always a pleasure to host. We'll be back on stream again soon. Maybe we'll take you behind the scenes of The Throne with Mr. Brendan Thorne, or who knows what else we might be playing. Maybe we'll play some Gambit bounties when the Drifter takes center stage.
Thanks to Velveeta.
Pardon me?
Thanks to Velveeta.
Thanks to Velveeta. Thank you so much for our raid team. Crowd in on that camera. Sorry we have you in the friendly confines of our streaming stage, but thanks so much for playing. Well done, and we appreciate you taking a dive so that we can show you how the final boss scorches the sky. With that, we'll sign off, and we'll see you again on these hot seats very soon. That's all.